Good afternoon. So today what we're going to learn is how to choose a substrate for the project that you're going to do, first of all. Second of all, learn how to either stretch or prime that substrate to prepare it for oil paint. And then lastly, we're going to put an imprimatura on it, either the traditional burnt umber kind of glaze imprimatura or a solid kind of opaque gray imprimatura. All right, class, so we are going to stretch a canvas for the first section. So what I've done is I've joined stretcher bars. I've used a hammer in order to make sure that they are joined nice and neatly. I've also used a 90-degree angle to make sure that the corners are 90 degrees. If you do not have a 90-degree angle, I would suggest a door frame and make sure that you check catty corner sides. You want to make sure that your canvas, the prime side, is facing down towards your table, and that you can see this stretcher bar has a beveled edge. So this part goes down. Basically, when you stretch, the canvas will sit on this top edge here and not against this entire piece of wood. So I have my stretcher bars ready to go. I'm going to check and make sure that everything is lining up. I have my clamps and I have my staple gun. We're going to start in the center and we're going to work our way out. So the goal here is to stretch your canvas, but not to have it so taut that it warps the stretcher bars. We're going to use what are called keys, and these keys will add the tension that we need later on. You can see that my staple gun is old and is having a hard time actually piercing through this wood. So later on what I'll do is I'll go ahead and use a hammer to help me get the staples in properly. So basically I'm doing about finger taut. So I'm pulling right now just a little bit. You can also see that the canvas is longer than it is wide. So I'm going to have to adjust the amount of times that I do it on the sides compared to here, because we're going to run into these corners pretty quickly. Okay, so now that I have my basic 4 staples in, I'm going to actually start working around. And note, on this side here, I'm going to probably do 2 or 3 on each side. Same here, and then just 1 on each side here. And again, I am just putting a little bit of tension, not a lot. And again, I'm not worried about these staples being perfectly flush. I will adjust that a little bit later. And you can see as well that I am putting them about 1.5 inches or so apart from each other. Like so. I'm going to flip this around. We can already see that it's starting to get taut. Again, my goal is not to make it real taut, it's just to give it a little bit of tension. And more or less I want to end up where I ended up on the other side. Some people also use nails instead of staples. In my case, it would probably be a good idea since these are not so flush. So just checking, making sure, okay, that feels good. Could have given myself a little bit more canvas on the edges over there. That's okay. And some wood, again, is more, like on this side, the staples are going in pretty good. So, don't know why there's such a discrepancy, but for some reason there is. And you can see now I'm starting to catch up with the amount of distance I have here to the amount of distance I have here, which is good. The key is just to be consistent. Okay. So I want to end up pretty much the same place on the other side. Almost done. I'm going to make sure that the canvas is not warping the stretcher bar, especially towards the end. You know, the tendency is to, that looks pretty good, is to start really tapering in. You can see here, we're really good. Okay, so we're at the same level. This side over here, again, there's not a lot of canvas, so I'm just giving it a little bit. Now here, I'm gonna go ahead, short side, I'm gonna flip it over, and then on this side will be the final. So I'm at the end of this here. Again, just a little taut. Make sure not to staple that corner. So I'm going just next to it. I'm going to do the same thing here. And I'm pretty much creating a nice little end marker here. Again, I'm just making it taut enough. Going close to the edge, but not to the edge. That side is complete. Looks good. The corners in here, they look plumb. They look level. They are not warped. Making the fold over. Oops, making it over here as well. Okay. You want to make sure that this is nice and clean. So take your time. For some reason it doesn't want to. There we go. Sure not to staple the two seams. Good. That's pretty taut already. At the end, you should not have any wrinkles in the canvas. If you do, then you have to figure out why a certain spot you made more taut than the other. Then you're going to have to take the staples out. So just be aware of that. Good. So you can see that I'm constantly checking. You can see here there's a little bit of a ripple. So that's the keys will fix that. almost at the end. Okay. Last one. There we go. So if we look at the canvas now, both sides look plumb, they don't look warped. So all is well. We've got a nice little bounce. So the keys, they'll go in here. Before I paint, I usually like to put one caddy corner just to give myself a little bit of maneuvering without actually committing to too much tautness. When you start painting is when you will. So there's still a little bit of a ripple here. So I'm going to go ahead and put the other key in on this side. Good. And one here. We should be good. Just be careful not to rip your canvas. Okay, good. Now we are good. If we need to, we can put in 4 more keys. All right, and that's how you stretch a canvas. Okay, class, so the next stage here is going to be to putting our primer onto the masonite panel, which I got at Home Depot and I had cut down, and the paper. The Belgian linen is already triple primed ultra smooth, so that is done. The masonite here, you can get it cut down. Like I said, they come in 4x8 sheets. I got this one cut down, and normally I like to do a even and an odd number. This is 15 by 30. This is 13 by 28. So I just think aesthetically it's more appealing. I filled up about a quarter with water. I have a professional grade gesso. Make sure that it's professional grade. If you have the student grade, more than likely it's going to get mildewed. And then I have some smooth grit 600A, I believe it is. Yes. And then also some sandpaper that is 400. So I'm going to start off with the 400 and then we'll end up with the 600. So we're going to take the gesso and the water, and I like to dilute the first couple of layers with water. That way I'm sure that the gesso penetrates into the substrate. So either the paper and or the masonite. So we want to make sure that is the case, because the less it does, the more when you put your painting, your oil painting on there, the more it's going to sink in. So we want to make sure that we're setting the right environment. Once I have the gesso in there, I'm going to start stirring. I just use the back end of a brush for now. I want to make sure that it's stirred in all the way, so no clumps. It may take a few minutes. And I should have paper towel as well to clean up this brush. So it looks like I could put more gesso in there. It's maybe just a little bit too runny, but I can always add. It's much harder to try to subtract. So, and in this case, what I'm going to use is a plastic bag afterwards to cover so I don't lose this. So I'm going to end up doing multiple layers on here. I've gone as high as 12 layers. So each layer, the ultimate goal is to have a smooth surface. So whatever it takes to get there. But we're going to try to do it in like 6 layers here. So the first 2 layers are pretty diluted. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep adding gesso so it gets a little bit thicker. I'm also going to turn on a fan in between to just speed up the drying time. For this demonstration, I'm only doing 2 canvases, but normally I would have like 6 panels or something like that and just spend the day doing this here. So that way I have panels ready for the next painting. I don't have to spend time prepping. Okay, I'm just going to get a paper towel. It's always good to have the materials right at your disposal instead of trying to run around and get them. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close. I always keep a spoon in my gesso. That way I don't have to worry about it. Okay, and then I have a, I think this is squirrel hair. Very smooth, very good for actually priming. So it looks like it should probably be a little bit thicker. But it's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the base coat, only going in one direction. My table has been, I have basically craft paper on there, so I don't have to worry about destroying the table. I'm going in one direction to begin with, and then I will go in the opposite direction. So once I have my base coat, okay, all the way across, and I'm trying to create a nice smooth surface. So the better you do this at the beginning, the easier it is in the end. Then I'm going to go ahead and go the other direction. And because it's wet, it goes on pretty easy. As it gets thicker, it starts drying pretty quickly. So just keep that in mind and make sure that you don't have the fan running in the later stages because you don't want it to dry on you. So this one I ended horizontally. The next one I'll end vertically. So I'm just going to move this one aside and scoop the paper over. Make sure there's nothing on the paper. So in between, I'm also going to go ahead and make sure that if there are any kind of like dust particles or anything like that on the paper, I'm going to make sure that I eliminate that before I put the next layer on. Very important that you do that. You don't want to have like a piece of hair or something like that you just keep putting layers and layers on, and then the last layer, you're like, oh, there's a hair that I have to paint over now. So attention to detail is important. And the paper seems to absorb a lot faster. I'm going to go the opposite direction. This one I think I'm going to end vertically, like so. Don't worry if you don't catch all the spots. You will do in the long run. Lastly, I'm going to take a Publix bag and I'm just going to wrap this and turn on the fan and let it set. Good afternoon, class. Today, what we are going to focus on is how to apply an imprimatura. Last session, what we worked on was actually priming our substrates. So we have those primed, they're dry. I'm going to go ahead and put burnt umber imprimatura on the stretch linen, which is the classical one. And then on the paper and the masonite, I'm going to mix value gray number 5 more or less with white and black and add a little bit of brown just to warm it up. Okay, so what we're going to need today are our substrates, so the canvas, the paper, the masonite, a palette knife, 2 brushes because we're doing 2 different types of imprimatura, the distilled turpentine, which I put in a smaller container just to facilitate, and lastly the oil paint. I'm going to start with the brown because it's the easiest. I want to put enough out there where I don't run out. And I will make the pile as well for the other ones. That way we can do this in a pretty seamless kind of manner. I don't want to run out. The brown is not so much of a concern if I run out, but the gray, I don't want to have to remix that. So I'm going to do about 70% white with about another 15% black and 15% brown. Okay, so the brown is already made. I just poured it out of the tube. The gray, let's mix that up. Now, because we've primed our paper and masonite, it should go on pretty smooth. 1, 2, you want to apply it evenly. So I'm going to actually mix the solvent into this gray and brown beforehand to try to create a consistency. And I think I will also go ahead and put a little bit of the solvent already on the substrates, just to give it a bit of a buffer between the imprimatura, and so it doesn't soak in as much. Just trying to give myself a little bit more. When it comes to the gray, it's better to have it a little bit lighter than too dark, because what we're going to be doing is drawing on the brown and the gray. So if you make it too dark, it's going to be difficult to actually see your lines. I'm sure that's okay. I'm going to use the other palette knife just to scrape away. And I want to make sure that all of this is nice and even. So I'll use one palette knife for the gray and one palette knife for the brown. Okay, so let's begin. I'm going to pour a little bit of the solvent onto my palette. And again, I just want to dilute it. Good. Wipe off the excess. I'm going to dip my brush into the solvent, and like I said, I'm just going to put a quick little base coat of solvent on there to avoid where the paint contacts the canvas at first. You may end up having a slightly darker value there. Okay, so now that I have my base coat, I'm going to go ahead and start applying it. The initial objective is just to cover the canvas. So it doesn't have to look pretty. It just has to have the base coat on there. And then we're going to start cleaning it up. I like to create a imprimatura that has no kind of texture or anything. So I'm going to focus on that once I have this base coat in there. And I may end up actually even taking away some of the imprimatura just to lighten it up a little bit. Close this top here. So the rectified turpentine smells quite a bit. If you don't have rectified turpentine, you can use the traditional terps. I would just make sure that it's not recycled terps, that it is new. That way you don't contaminate. Just wiping away a little bit of the excess from the brush. And then I like to set this overnight That way I'm sure that the base coat is nice and dry. You don't want to actually start painting on the imprimatura while it's wet, because you're going to lift it up. So you can see now that we'll have a nice clean base coat, no texture, nice and even. Ultimately this gets covered, but I like to just start off. It's a psychological thing, I guess. Okay, and that one is done. I'm going to let it dry, like I said, overnight. So put that there. Now I'm going to move on to this one here. I'm going to do the same thing. So this brush is not going to fit so nicely. Force it in there. And I need to also pour some out there. You can also see that the tabletop is clean, so I cleaned it, so I didn't have the primer and any of the leftover sandpaper. So that looks pretty good. Just diluting it a little bit with solvent. And let's start. Now this one here, it's going on opaque. So the only reason that I'm putting the solvent on there is just to make it easier. So it goes on a lot easier than if I was trying to put it on with a dry brush. And again, this is going to get covered, so the reason that you want to put it in imprimatura is just so you're not dealing with the harsh white of the canvas, which is going to distort the values that you're actually seeing. Unless you're in a white room, of course, but probably rare. Hopefully I have enough paint to do the other. Okay. All right. And the last one, I'm just going to swap out these two. Okay, I have some leftover solvent there, so. So you can see it's pretty straightforward, this process. each layer is going to make the end result that much richer. So, you know, if you do this nice, if you prime it well, then everything should go on pretty smooth. And the reason why we want to use a smooth panel or substrate is because we are going to be doing form painting. And the smoothness allows for easier transitions. So that is the reason why so many figurative artists use smooth linen or substrates. So unless you like to have a textured effect and you apply paint in a thick manner, then you may want to consider. And of course, as artists, the ultimate choice is yours. You should experiment for sure to see what is the thing that you like to paint. Is it a smooth or is it a rough texture? That being said, you should start off with what is then done over hundreds of years, and then from there you learn the process and then you deviate and create your own voice. Oh, this is drying up pretty fast, ironically enough. So the rectified turpentine smells quite a bit, so I would definitely ventilate the room, if not during, after, because it is pretty strong odor. There's a little bit of a residue on there. And there's a little bit of the canvas showing through. That's okay. Again, this is the base coat, right? So you are going to go over this. And there we go. So I hope that sort of demystifies how to go through a process of selecting a substrate, priming that substrate, then putting the imprimatura on it. From there, we're going to start doing the drawing. I'm more likely going to do it on the paper, just because I think most people will, that or the panel. Make sure that once you've done all of this process that you let it set up, you let it dry, and that you start painting the next day.